I did it. I did. I jumped on the bandwagon and I got myself a Harvest Right freeze dryer. I know, it's crazy. What we're going to do today, though, is we're going to unbox and run this huge monster together. And I'm going to share with you the reasons why I got a freeze dryer. And they may not be what you think that they are, or maybe what most people get a freeze dryer for. At the end, though, we are going to run the freeze dryer for the first time. I'm going to run a batch of strawberries, and then we're going to eat the strawberries dry. Plus, we're going to eat them reconstituted so that I can give you a very, very honest feedback on what freeze-dried food tastes like. Although I think many of us are used to, trying the dried freeze-dried, I am particularly interested in finding out how it is when it's reconstituted. So let's jump right into this and see how hard it actually is to put together, because it's just me doing it. And if I can do it, you can definitely do it.
Harvest Right does this whole process where when they have it delivered to your house, they have FedEx call you and schedule it. So that way, when the FedEx driver arrives, you can actually inspect the product. And they encourage you to do that. They even sent me a video explaining exactly how to do this so that you don't accept a product that has been damaged in shipping. The FedEx driver was like super patient and helpful, and he had a lot of experience with doing these. So he even helped us take it apart and show us what to look for, and everything came perfect. There wasn't even a dent on the box. It was awesome. I wanted to take a minute to kind of talk about why I got a freeze dryer in the first place. My garden isn't super huge. I do garden year round, but a lot of the times my harvests come in kind of slow. And I don't have like any kind of animals on my property like chickens or cows for dairy or meat or anything like that. So really, the only things that I would be freeze drying is the things coming out of my garden or anything I got on sale at the store that I thought was a really good price. And so it was hard to justify why I was getting this freeze dryer, years ago when I even contemplated getting it. And so a lot of the times I couldn't, factor it in my head how it could be a financial savings. And so even today, I still struggle with what the return on investment would be with a product like this, because it is quite expensive and it does pull a lot of electricity, and you still have to buy the food if you don't have a significant garden or animals like I mentioned earlier. If that's something that you guys are interested in to see, what is the ROI on something like this, let me know and I will sit down and work on the math and do a whole video. If that is something that you're interested in, I think it's going to be rather complex because it's going to be something that I'm going to have to calculate year over year, which is not a big deal. I can definitely do that. But I wanted to say all that to say that this was not the reason why I got the freeze dryer. The reason really why I got the freeze dryer is because probably the number one reason is I don't particularly enjoy all home canned foods. In fact, I don't enjoy a lot of them. I like jams, jellies, pickles, soup, broths, all the tomato products and such, but then when you start getting into the meats and the vegetables, I feel like everything just gets really, really mushy. And I'm into texture, and it just was not holding up to what I enjoy from a texture perspective. So then I got more into freezing, but then my freezers got full. So then it was up in the air on whether we go buy a freezer, another freezer to store our excess, or do we freeze dry? And so that was kind of bouncing around in my head. Obviously, a freezer is actually less expensive than a freeze dryer by quite a bit. The electricity is a little bit less with a freezer than a freeze dryer, but it runs continuously, and a freeze dryer does not run continuously. So then there was a lot of other factors that came into play. So I have a huge garden harvest, and sometimes I have so many tomatoes in my garden or in my freezer, that I have no space for anything else. And that happened this last spring. So much so that we couldn't fit any kind of meat in our freezer. And so we were kind of going to the store every couple of days to get those things. And that was really just a hassle. The harvests that come in excess, I would like to be able to do something with it. And I'm not a big fan of the canning, and I'm running out of freezer space. The other big reason was herbs. There are a couple herbs in the garden that just don't dehydrate well. Same in teas. So I do it for seasoning and teas. And the ones that are sticking out to me the most are basil and parsley. And then also some of my medicinal herbs that I use for, our health and such. And I feel like they're losing a lot of their nutritional value through the dehydrating process. They're also losing a lot of their flavor. Another reason is to reduce food waste. Because it's just my husband and I, when we get things like cream or eggs or, the things that maybe you don't use quite as often, cream cheese, sour cream, sometimes those small containers go bad in our fridge because we just don't use that much between the two of us. And so that was another reason. Another reason, if that isn't enough, was that I have something in me that is just unable to cook for two people. I'm going to blame it on my Italian heritage and my family and how I was raised and how, we cook for a crowd. I don't know why. So we always have leftovers, and that's cool. Leftovers is fun. But after the first day of leftovers, usually my husband is just about over it. So that's another reason why I'd like to have something to do with those leftover meals. And then our final reason probably is the last time we went on an RV trip, we had some struggles with our RV fridge. And this is totally common. RV fridges tend to be completely unreliable. Ours is based on solar, so it's also based on whether or not, we're getting a good amount of sun during the day. We have a secondary way of giving it power, but we have to be stationary in order to do it. So there's this whole thing. And on top of that, the trailer has a maximum weight capacity, especially in the back of the trailer, which is where our kitchen is located. And sometimes when you're camping and you're off grid and you don't have electricity, making an entire meal is kind of a bit of a pain in the butt. So being able to have these ready-made meals where you just add hot water, which we can use from our propane, heating up water on our propane, was just all of those reasons ended up being the reason why we were like, let's go ahead and do it. Not necessarily for the financial savings, but for all of the other reasons, the convenience, the health, the nutrients in the food, the flavor in the food, a new way of preserving our harvest where we keep some of that texture. Those were our primary reasons.
Okay, I got it all set up. It wasn't particularly hard, but I will say that if you're new to putting things together, it wasn't like super detailed. It was some of the stuff I felt was probably out of order, like turning on the pump before plugging in the freeze dryer. Like some of the stuff didn't make sense to me, so I did it my way. It seems like everything's okay, but I did follow the directions as closely as possible, but they weren't perfect, not for somebody who is not technically inclined. So consider that. But now we're gonna get loaded on some trays. The only place in my house that I had that had the availability to put a freeze dryer was in my spare bedroom. I know you're probably thinking, like, why don't you put it in your garage? Well, freeze dryers, or the Harvest Right freeze dryer, has some information on it that says that it can't operate over a certain temperature, and once it gets above, I want to say it's 80 or 95 degrees, that it operates less effectively. My garage, for about 7 months of the year, is at least 90 degrees because I'm here in Florida. So that isn't really an option if I plan on using these things very often, which I do. I did go ahead and purchase some tray lids, and so that way that when I freeze them in the freezer, that I can stack these on top so that it's not food laying on food. I also have heard that you can actually freeze dry on these. I don't know if I'm going to do that, but I've heard people actually use them as like a second set of trays. They do not come with the unit. I've bought them separately. I know we mentioned that we were doing strawberries, and we are going to do strawberries, but Harvest Right recommends that you do a bread run first. So you put bread, you moisten it with a little bit of water, and then you run the freeze dryer for the full cycle. And the purpose behind this is so that, most new equipment have that like new chemically smell. Sometimes it's burning off some oil, some, if you've ever like got a brand new toaster and used it for the first time and you're like, what does that smell? Well, that's what's going to happen here. They warn us about that. And they suggest using a bread run because the bread will absorb that scent. And then after the bread run, your rest of your food will not smell like that, you know, industrial chemical scent. So I have some bread. I could have made my own, but I'm like, wow, I'm not going to do that much effort for something that I have to throw away after because it's got like a chemical smell to it. Doesn't sound that appealing. So I'm going to get my trays out. I did get the Harvest premium pump, and I got the 5-tray medium, right? So there is a medium that is a 4-tray, but I bought mine during a special. I think it was like a Black Friday special. And the one that they had on sale, I believe the only one you could get at that moment was the 5-tray, which I'm totally fine with because I want 5 trays. I don't want 4 trays. I'm told that if you have the 4 trays that you can actually stack higher the food. And with the 5 trays, it's a little skinnier, so you can't pack as much food on, you know, that level. But it's just me and my husband, and you know, I don't think I'm going to use it that way. From what I understand, that's probably more of a concern if you're freeze drying candy, which apparently is like this whole new trend. And I'm not gonna lie, I love candy, so I probably will give it a shot at some point in time once I freeze dry enough things that I'm comfortable doing it. But for now, I think I'm just going to be doing regular food. And in particular, my first few runs are going to be fruits and vegetables. And then I'll move on to ready-made meals, and then I'll move on to meats. And probably herbs. I'll definitely be doing herbs. So forgive the fact that we are using a bed to arrange this. Like I said, this is my spare room, so this is all I have. So I'm going to arrange the bread on here. I think in the future I'll probably set this in the kitchen, do all my prep in the kitchen, and then come out here with the trays completely loaded. Publix had this bread on sale, BOGO, so I'm keeping 1 loaf for myself, and then we've got 1 loaf that's going into the freeze dryer. So thankfully, it's not like I had to spend a lot of money on this bread. It does feel wasteful though. Okay, now that we have the bread there, they say to moisten the bread a little bit. So never moistened bread before. This is an interesting process. Okay, now here's the real test. I'm going to seal it, close it, and start it. Okay. It did ask me a question there that I didn't realize I had to answer, which is what kind of pump I have, and I have the Premier oil pump. I hear that's better than the oil-free, and I hear it's better than the standard because you don't have to change the oil quite as much. So right now it says that it's cooling the vacuum chamber, so wait 15 minutes. So it's going to get it down, I guess, to make it cold. And then it'll start freeze drying. It's rather loud, so we're just going to watch it.
The stages of the freeze drying process start with the pre-freeze. So the pre-freeze is only 15 minutes, and I was not supposed to put my trays in, but I did by accident. I don't think it had any problem with the bread run, but normally you let it pre-freeze before you put your trays in, and then it begins its freeze, and it freezes until you get down to about negative 20 degrees or so. Then it switches to freeze drying, and it's also trying to hit some sort of number of low temperature and vacuum pull, and I don't know exactly what that perfect number was, but it's definitely below -20, and it's definitely on the low side of like 400 on the vacuum pull. After that, then it moves to the drying stage, and it is in this stage probably the longest. And this is where it's actually, evaporating the water out of the food, and then that turns into a gas, and then it sticks to the edge of the freeze dryer as a solid, which is ice. After that, there is a little bit of extra dry time that you can do if you like.
So it's all done. This was the bread run. So all this is just going to go into the compost. But I'm very curious of what the texture is like. Oh, wow. Oh, it is just like, okay, like styrofoam. That's exactly what it's like. And these guys feel really dry. I don't feel any cold spots. I don't feel, they always tell you, like, look for cold spots, but moist spots when you break it in half. Is it really crunchy? And it really is. So I think it's done. That was so easy. It was a little like, I don't know, I was a little anxiety ridden through this whole process, mainly because being the prepared person I am, I had to like go onto every Facebook site there is and join it. And a lot of people talk about the problems that they have. And so as the machine was progressing through every single, cycle and transition and all those things, I was watching it. I got up in the middle of the night and checked on it. Like, I was super obsessed with it. And none of the problems that anyone has ever talked about happened to me. The one thing that did happen that actually I hadn't seen a lot of people talk about in the forums, and maybe it's because of the climate I live in Florida. It's hot and humid. We're in the middle of winter and it's still hot and humid. And so I get condensation on the front of the machine. So the glass door that closes when it's freezing, the ring around it and the door have a significant amount of condensation, to the point that I had to put a towel down. My husband was in heating and air conditioning. He was in HVAC, so he's very familiar with refrigeration and vacuum and pressures and all this stuff. And he believes that this gap right here, this tiny, tiny little gap, is allowing enough air to escape to cause that condensation and the slight icing of the ring. I don't think it's a big deal, but we did go ahead and order something overnight. I think it's called backer tape or backer tube or something like that. I'll show it to you when he puts it in. But it's basically like a foam insulation in a tiny, tiny tube. And we should be able to fit it into there to try to, reduce that gap. But it really did not impact the process at all. It didn't, it still got down to very low temperatures. It got down to very low pressure. The vacuum was pulling like a serious vacuum. It heated up the trays when it was supposed to. Everything happened perfectly. So I am just so incredibly stoked. I mentioned that a lot of people have said that they've had issues, but I think God was speaking to me in this moment because he knew how anxiety ridden I was. Last night I happened to go onto the site and read, I'm reading because I want to learn everything. And somebody had posted like, hey, I'm thinking about getting one of these, but you guys talk about so many issues that, it seems kind of scary to spend that kind of money and have issues. Within just a few hours, there was 500 comments. I stopped reading them after a while, but 500 comments of people talking about the perfect experience they had. And apparently I am one of the ones that had a positive experience. So the bread went well, but now here's the big one. I gotta get strawberries done, and they need to be done in about 50 hours because I have family coming to stay and they sleep in this room, and that thing, when it's running and the vacuum running, is very loud, and I cannot imagine anybody is gonna wanna sleep in here with that. So we're gonna let that machine defrost. We're gonna put that backer tape on it or tube on it, and then we're gonna get these strawberries in and cross our fingers and hope that they finish in time. If they don't, it's okay. I'll cancel the thing and put them in the freezer, and then we'll restart it once my family leaves. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and get these in the compost and get the strawberries into the trays and get this guy defrosted, and we're gonna run the strawberries.
Before we jump into the strawberries, I just wanted to show you really quick that insulation that we added to help with the condensation. This is just a small, this one is rubber, but we also have a insulation one that is foam. We're trying the rubber first. And after running the strawberries, that looked like it worked out really, really well. So now we're ready to start the strawberry run. And so I had these strawberries from a project that I was working on for my neighbors for Christmas. I gave out a strawberry banana jam. And so I had miscalculated how many strawberries I needed. So I had a bunch of extra strawberries. These are not the strawberries from my garden. These are strawberries from the store. The garden ones are just now starting to produce. So hopefully I'll be doing another round of these. So what I did was I flash froze these, which means you just cut them into pieces and you put them on a tray on a single layer, so that way they're not touching, and you put them in the freezer and then they freeze for about an hour, and then you can separate them and put them together into the same bag, and then they won't get stuck together. Now, a couple of mine did get stuck together here, mainly because I probably didn't freeze them for as long, but it was no big deal. The next trays I'm going to do are some pureed banana. I've had this in my freezer for probably about 6 months, and I need something to do with it. I've been using it for smoothies, but you know, they just are hard to separate once they're frozen solid like this. So I thought, hey, this would be a great candidate to use on the freeze dryer. And then I had some of my Tromboncino squash, which was a huge harvest that I had from this thing. And I have 3 more bags of sliced Tromboncino squash in the freezer that I am going to freeze dry after this run. So what I'm doing right here now is I'm going to be weighing each one of the trays for multiple reasons. So the first reason is there is a maximum capacity on these trays. I believe it's 2.5 or 3 pounds. I believe it's 3 pounds now. It used to be 2.5, but now it's 3. And so I weigh them at the start to make sure I'm not over the maximum amount. And also I'm weighing them so that at the end of the process, I can subtract how much they weigh at the end of the process to how much they weighed at the beginning to know exactly how much water to add back to them to reconstitute. I don't think that's necessarily a huge deal when it comes to fruits and vegetables, but maybe when it comes to whole meals, that will be more important. Because I had such a short window, I also spread these out and did not put like a significant amount. You can put way more on these trays than what I did. I was just trying to make sure that they would finish quicker, so you can see a lot of space in between them. So this has been going for about 24 hours, and then it ran, I think, another 6 hours because I was sleeping. It ran overnight, and once I woke up, I was able to pull them out. And what I'm doing right here is I'm writing down all the weight of them, and then I'm sticking them back in the freeze dryer for 2 extra hours. The reason I'm doing this is because once they freeze dry and the machine tells you that they're dry, it is a really good idea and highly recommended that you weigh them and then do them for another 2 hours and then weigh them again to make sure that the weight has not changed. And the reason for that is to tell you if the weight changes, that means there was still moisture in them. The machine might have said it was done, but there was still moisture in them because the number went down. And so that tells you that they weren't dry enough, and they're not going to hold in storage for that long storage period if they're not completely dry. Mine, after the 2 hours, they were exactly the same weight. So they are dry, dry, dry. For this run, I decided to put them into mason jars, and what you're going to see here is not the ideal way to store these, but I am testing it out, right? I want to make sure that when I dried them properly, that I did dry them properly. So I'm putting them in a mason jar and I'm vacuum sealing them. What you should do, and what is recommended, is that if you're going to put them in a mason jar, you also add an oxygen absorber and you vacuum seal them. If you aren't going to use a mason jar, you should use a 7mm Mylar bag. This is a special type of bag that keeps out light and it keeps out air from absorbing. A regular plastic bag is going to absorb air, believe it or not. And then you put an oxygen absorber in the Mylar bag, and then you use the heat sealer to seal the Mylar bag closed. Now, like I said, I did not do that because I'm doing something I think is referred to as conditioning. And what that means is I'm sealing these up. Well, not the strawberries because those were gone within just a few days. They are addicting. But the other things like the powders, the strawberry powder, the banana powder, and the whole zucchinis, I'm doing something like I said, I think is called conditioning. And this means that I am putting it in there and I'm going to let it sit for weeks or even months. And I'm going to observe them over a long period of time to see if they are, adding or, increasing in its moisture content. See if any mold forms. So that's going to tell me whether I am doing this properly because it is a little bit of a learning experience. And man, it would be awful to waste food that you've spent so much time growing or money that you spent shopping for it and then going through this whole process of preserving your food and sealing your food to find out that you didn't dry it enough, which is my biggest concern.
So we got our strawberries all freeze dried, our zucchinis, which I have a lot more to do. And then I had some extra strawberries. I didn't want to put them in a half jar, so I made strawberry powder and I made banana powder, and I'm going to use these in smoothies. I'm super excited about these. But let's do our taste test now. I'm going to get a little bit of water and we're going to rehydrate one of these strawberries. I have two. I'm going to drop in there, and I'm told you just put them in water for a couple minutes. I also have two that are completely freeze dried, so let's try these. Flavor wise, are amazing. Texture is a little weird. You know I'm a texture person. Kind of reminds me of, remember those little Lucky Charms when you were a kid, and the little marshmallows that they had in the Lucky Charms? It kind of reminds me of that. Not as crunchy. It's actually a little softer. I like it. Oh man, those rehydrated really fast. Okay. Save one for my husband because he's very curious. Alright, so I think it's rehydrated. Let's try it. Tastes just like a strawberry. Like a fresh strawberry. Wow, that's actually pretty surprising. First off, I'm surprised at how quickly they rehydrate. And second, I'm surprised at how much they're like their original form. Now, I want you to see, I don't know if you can see that so well. It's not crisp like a strawberry typically is, but it kind of reminds me of like strawberry shortcake. You just made the strawberry filling part that goes in strawberry shortcake where it's a little bit softened because it's been in the gel and it's kind of like that, but it's not like full soft. It's not full soft. It definitely has some texture. My husband's been very curious, so I'm going to send this in to him and see what he thinks. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today and figuring out how this whole freeze dryer thing works. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, make sure you head down and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos. Also, if you found this video helpful in making your decision as to whether or not to get a freeze dryer, and you have decided to move forward and get a freeze dryer, I would be incredibly thankful and honored if you use my link below down in the description. It is at no cost to you and it does help fund the channel, so I really appreciate it if you would do that. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and happy gardening and happy freeze drying now.